Baby, baby.
Good evening, listeners. It's your boy, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Mr. Worldwide. Recent update says that this podcast has been listened to in 4 countries, up from 3 last year, so thank you to all the international listeners out there, whoever you are, and of course to my domestic listeners in the United States. Glad to have you here as well. There's a lot of sounds going on because I'm in my car. And again, I try to fix the audio when I can, but if you hear kind of rough transitions or anything like that, believe me, I'm working on it. But I don't really just have time to do it anywhere else, so I kind of have to record my thoughts as I go. Well, in the last episode of this podcast, it was before the November election. And I'm not going to lie, going into it, the polls all said that, at least when I say the polls, many of the legitimate polls showed close races. And however, there were a lot of garbage polls put out by certain GOP groups that gave the image of races being closer than they actually were. So, come Tuesday, November 8th, after I've worked my day job and decided to tune in and listen to the election results, count my surprise when all of a sudden we see Democrats take the lead in initial vote counts and then not lose them. They've mastered mail-in voting and early voting, which again are great tools that are super helpful, and if anybody knows what they're talking about in terms of politics, should be pressing them. And look what happened. It worked out for them. So, quick recap of basically how the elections went is that the Republicans were expected to take the House and the Senate at the federal level, not to mention go after a bunch of different state-level houses after years of, the pandemic, the lockdowns, the issues. And with Donald Trump, quote-unquote, no longer being, in office, there was this assumption that the Republican Party and, its many operatives in the quote-unquote, post-Trump era to, win and do things. But what happened was that, as I mentioned in my previous podcast, that Donald Trump put his finger on the scale in many of the GOP primaries, pushing for candidates that he liked and his base liked at the expense of, electability and winning. You see this everywhere. Blake Masters and Kerry Lake in Arizona, John Gibbs and Tudor Dixon in Michigan, Darren Bailey here in Illinois. This has been a problem for years now, and I know that there are smart GOP people like myself who know what the problem is, and there are many others in the scene who know the truth and either lie about it or obfuscate it. That's exactly what's happening right now. Just to be clear, Darren Bailey, Mr. Bailey, that farmer from Southern Illinois, he got a whole, 6 minutes before the press called the race for J.B. Pritzker. And you'd be amazed the amount of people who were genuinely shocked that this race was called so early and so fast. How's that possible? How's it possible the race was called that early when we were told that it was a close race within single digits? Well, again, Dan Proft and his people who play by the rules pack put out one poll, one very terrible, not good poll that anyone who understands polling knows was not a good poll. But he presented this as, hey, it's neck and neck between JB and Darren Bailey. Obviously, that's nowhere close to being the case, but Dan Proft needs to grift to make money, so he has to continue to produce things to make it sound like the things he's doing are actually working. And so he came up with all this stuff and said, look at all the gains we made. And they talk about how they increased their vote share in, certain areas of the city. And it's like, you get that you lost, right? You get that you lost badly in the suburbs. And, it's one thing to... Are we surprised that someone who called Chicago a hellhole lost within minutes of the polls closing? You shouldn't be. Anybody who knew what was happening wasn't shocked by it, but lots of people delude themselves into thinking that their social media presence or the intensity of their feelings is the equivalent of an understandable metric of popular support. There's a suspicion among me that many in the crowd knew that he would win, but they were just in it anyway. They were in it for whatever few dollars they could scrape up, and then once it was over, they'll just fade back into the woodwork and move on to their next races. Obviously, the Democratic Party just crushed it all over the state. And frankly, there was a plan from the highest levels of the GOP with this year to have Mayor Irvin of Aurora become the nominee, have access to Ken Griffin's fortune to help keep up with J.B. Pritzker, and to use some of that money to help other candidates across the ballot, while at the same time increase the number of people on the actual ballot so that there's people to vote for them. I was there. It sounded like a good strategy at the time. And had the primary been in March, maybe things would have been different. But as we all know, as time went on, the attacks grew, and the base, by frankly the large margin, 56%, voted for Darren Bailey. And, that should have been the first sign that something was wrong. And now, as the election is over, it just goes to show you that candidate quality matters. And putting a hillbilly anti-Semite from the South at the top of the ticket with no ability to raise money for anyone aside from himself, which again, most of it didn't even go to him. It went to the political PAC run by Dan Proft. $50 million. For what? Nothing. Nothing at all. And yet, what are we hearing? What am I hearing from the people in charge? What am I hearing from the MAGA crowd? Obviously, no one's on the same page, so here's what's happening. The establishment, which, for all their faults, knows a thing or two about politics, and the non-MAGA Republicans who ran in elections this year, they did well and won. Even in Arizona, where a Republican did win statewide office, and that particular Republican was not part of the crazy slate of people. They had Republicans win, not because of Trump, but because of their own local issues and support. They had to work their areas. They didn't do it based on a stolen election. They did it based on crime where they live, or inflation, or, real issues that people care about. But here's the problem. While those races should be pointed to as terms of success, and while the Republican Party did, in fact, it appears to have flipped the House of Representatives to that they're in control, the number is very weak. And there's going to be a trade-off between the new incumbents from New York and California, the new congresspeople from California and New York, who are not on the MAGA crazy train, with the deep red MAGA crazies who believe the election was stolen and demanded everyone else now cater to them. I don't imagine it's going to be an easy ride for Kevin McCarthy if he is the next Speaker of the House, particularly because the lead is so narrow and the division is so big that there's a very good chance that it will be a complete and total shit show in the House of Representatives as soon as they take it. And of course, the Senate is now firmly in Democratic control, with a race in December to decide if they have just an extra vote. They managed to win in Nevada. They won in Georgia, but not enough to avoid the runoff. And of course, they won in Arizona. The Democrats, the Democratic Party and their candidates. And you've got to ask yourself, how much longer? How much more loss and pain and suffering does the Republican Party have to go through before it realizes that the giant cancerous growth that is Donald Trump has, since he became the face and name of the Republican Party, has doomed it to failure? Think about this. From 2009 to 2015, the Republicans made gains in nearly every election, winning back the House in 2010, winning back the Senate in 2014, not to mention numerous state houses and governorships and everything else in between. And even in 2016, with Donald Trump on the top of the ticket, they managed to squeeze out a win at the White House. So that means for that brief moment in 2017, right, the GOP's long work of getting favorable maps and aggressive candidate recruitment and all that jazz they put into trying to win, it effectively worked. But as soon as Trump became the face of the party, it immediately goes downhill. 2018, 2020, 2021, and 2022 are all election cycles in which the Republican Party loses. Not just, seats that may have been won by chance. Long-held our seats now disappear. Demographics have changed so that many of the formulas that they've relied on for trying to win over suburban voters no longer work. Diversity is far more important than it used to be, and not to mention the fact that the gap between the college-educated and the non-college educated, particularly as the GOP used to be the party of the college-educated, has now moved away from that. The base is shrinking, and what they're replacing it with, increased numbers of Latinos and other African Americans and Asians and other places, which are all good things to help promote diversity. The switch is not enough to make a difference. You have white college-educated suburbanites, not necessarily just white, just college-educated suburbanites of all, backgrounds, going for the Democrats. And you essentially have the Republican Party with some small gains in urban areas where, frankly, the vote totals don't mean much in terms of actually creating change. While at the same time trying to run up the score in large rural areas where the amount of people just isn't enough. Part of the problem with where we're at in politics now is that maybe this has always been an issue, but as someone who grew up with the internet and now it being a prevalent source of our lives, I think perhaps more it has something to do with this, is that we've created, echo chambers and whole systems of information in which you could stay in the same general theme despite going to social network, to cable news, to radio. You could hear the same thing every day. You can hear the same, that we're going to win, the red wave is coming, everybody hates Joe Biden, the Democrats stole the last election. And they just assume that everyone thinks like them. They just assume that there's this hidden person out there, a group of people just pissed off, not knowing what to do, waiting for the Carrie Lakes of the world and the Charlie Kirks to awaken them and put them in a place where they can win. But guess what? These places don't exist, and these people don't exist. You've got Gen Z and kids voting Democrat in droves. You've got young unmarried women voting for the Democratic Party by 37%. Even if the Republican Party is winning married women and married men and unmarried men by, anywhere between 5 to 10, 12 points, if you're losing the largest voting bloc by 37 points, you're not going to win any elections, period. And instead of just truly understanding that maybe that block of voters, there's something in there that we can do to get them to try to at least listen or vote for us. Instead, they treat them with scorn. They call them childish cat ladies, angry, shrill women who just hate them. Which is, honestly, I'm not surprised. Honest introspection from people like this, from Dan Croft and other GOP operatives in the field, it doesn't. The facts don't actually matter because the way that they make money and gain attention often relies on these people, these groups being in charge. Because what else are they going to rail against if they're not there? What are they going to do when, they're the party in charge and everything is going wrong? They can't just pretend everything is fine. But if the Democrats are in charge, they can blame it on them all day, every day. It's sad, but it's an unfortunate fact. But even in this case, when you try to blame it on them, if you don't have persons or people who can articulate a clear message about what needs to change and why, and that the person advocating for that change can trust you, you're not going to win any elections. Let's be honest with ourselves. The Republican Party deserved to lose this election. They deserved to lose because they catered to the worst instincts of the people in the party and Donald Trump. And when you put up a bunch of people who are fundamentally, diametrically opposed to what most of the voters want or care about, you're going to lose. And not just by, 5 or 6 points, which is the case for many, which is a very quantifiable, and I'll put the link in the description, quantifiable amount of voters to lose, right? Particularly when, if it's a really 50-50 kind of place and you're losing 5 to 6% of voters, then you're not actually serious about winning votes. You're just trying to score points for yourself or some sort of agenda that you have. But honestly, I was happy that the non-MAGA Republicans won and the Democrats beat the MAGA Republicans, because that's where the country's at. The vast majority of the country believes in a normal person, a non-MAGA Republican, or a liberal Democrat than a MAGA Republican. That's just where most of the country's at, period. Anybody with an understanding of the facts would know this, but not everyone has an understanding of the facts. And even if they do, their understanding of the facts could be skewed to try to help them, i.e. the Dan Crofts and the Charlie Kirks of the world. And I will just say, Darren Bailey lost, and in my last podcast, which I just listened to again to clarify, I said he would try to say the election was stolen, but it turns out he did not and conceded, so good, I guess. Good that he did the bare minimum that is expected of a losing candidate. More than can be said for Carrie Lake out in Arizona, which is a whole nother topic, but You know, it's amazing. It truly amazes me that these people I know, I've worked with, who know how politics works and knows that this is not an ideal situation to be in, yet they continue to just push it and hope that it works out for the best. Everyone is hoping that Donald Trump just dies or he gets indicted and that everyone can just move on and, you know, we could be a better Republican Party, a working class, diverse Republican Party, please. And now there is real serious talk, which again, how serious will it be when the actual election comes, we'll see, but there is real serious talk about a potential challenger or successor. Because as of right now, former President Trump is the only GOP candidate to announce he's running for president. And no one else has essentially backed off for the most part, but, you know, everyone tends to be gutting for the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who has done all sorts of MAGA-y type tricks and did manage to win his election in a landslide. That's Florida. Florida's not the rest of America, but I have a weird feeling that many of the Republican elites believe it is, and they believe that they can just force feed Ron DeSantis through and it will work. And here's the basic rundown of how this works, is that Donald Trump won the presidency one time. One time. And while that is not necessarily the formula to win, many of the GOP have decided, okay, this is the only thing that we have so far, so we're just going to replicate this. And it turns out it's a bad idea. Trump candidates lose. People who act like Trump lose, who aren't Trump, in swing states. Because people don't like Trump. They're tired of it. They're tired of seeing him. They're tired of hearing him. They're tired of the lies and the double standards and the bullshit and all of it. So, the thinking behind places like National Review and many conservative media channels is that the governor of Florida is now the future because he's been described as, quote, Trump with a brain and without baggage. Let me ask you something. If no other candidate who's acted like Trump has won, what is going to make Ron DeSantis be the guy who translates all of that? Do you think real MAGA folks are going to go for Ron DeSantis? No. Because Ron DeSantis isn't a real MAGA guy. He acts like one and has co-opted it to, you know, shore up his own political movement, but he was a backbencher congressman since the 2010s. He's not great at debates, and he's never had a real, I mean, he had a close election in 2018, but since then he hasn't had any kind of real challenge. And it seems clear that Donald Trump's attempt to, you know, call him out in terms of calling him Ron DeSanctimonious and saying that he's responsible for his political career, which, to be clear, in the state of Florida, for governor, he is. He picked him because Ron went out of his way to slob on Trump's knob and act like he was a mini version of him. But now he's the governor of Florida and he won, and it seems that everyone's hopes and dreams have been projected on him because they just assume, hey, we'll put this guy out and it's just going to be Trump but smart. Not understanding that Donald Trump was a well-known celebrity figure when he ran for office, and Ron DeSantis is not. The whole world knew who Donald Trump was in 2015. I very much am suspicious that even half the country knows who Ron DeSantis is. And so your plan, the plan that I'm hearing from the smart people and these conservatives like National Review and others is that we just have to take the personality and the policies of a man they didn't like and replace him with a clearly smarter, maybe more polished, more reserved politician. So what they're essentially hoping for is that the best of both worlds kick in, where they somehow both get Trump's celebrity appeal to win and their preferred policy standpoint. And it's all wishful thinking, because you can't have smart Trump without him being the way he is, and you can't have him being the way he is and another politician trying to co-opt that by being smart about it. Nothing about Trump is smart. Trump's whole mystique is anti-intellectualism, and I'm a smart businessman even though he's not. And we've seen smart people purposely dumb themselves down to talk to his fans and audience. Ron DeSantis among them. What's going to happen when you have to convince a bunch of college-educated people in the suburbs who used to vote Republican and still might, who are detested by Donald Trump, that this person who acts like him but smarter and more polished is somehow going to be the key to success? It's not. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not a key to success. I believe that the Republican Party, for the rest of this decade, is going to face a contraction. While in the last decade, the 2010s, they saw expansion through gerrymandering and maps and, aggressive pushes in the Obama era. The new era, with many more states doing fair maps and fair representation and ranked choice voting, with Trump poison affecting every R candidate in a swing state, and the diversification of traditional GOP strongholds and the movement of said GOP strongholds to places in the country where the population is shrinking or is shrunk. This is not a long-term strategy for success. It's going to end badly for the Republican Party. And, you listen to Fox News or anything else, and you hear that they're trying to push these different governors and different people to get the quote-unquote conservative message across. But for many at this point, it's not about being conservative. It's not about actual policies. There's two things they want. They want Donald Trump to be in charge, and they want people they don't like to hurt. There's a famous quote out there, or several famous quotes from the Trump administration that pretty much define it, being that the cruelty is the point, and he's not hurting the people he's supposed to hurt. For many people, Donald Trump wasn't just a person they liked and voted for. They used him to try to hurt people that they hate. They may hate the fact that they no longer control the world or have the same control of the world, or feel that what they're entitled to is no longer there, or perhaps that they've realized that many of the things they've believed were just incorrect or wrong. And there's this push, this hope to stop progress, to stop change, and to stop diversification, to not accept gays and trans and lesbians and immigrants, and to push to make it America the way they think it should be. This old kind of misconstrued idea of the white husband goes to work and the wife stays home and watches the kids, and the kids go to a school in the suburbs. For many people in the Republican Party, they're still trapped in that mindset. And they've basically twisted and coerced themselves between the different interest groups and factions that they now have landed on Donald Trump as the person to supposedly be the one who represents all of this. And what it goes to show you is that between the very hardcore pro-lifers and the pro-business sections of the economy that got what they want out of the Donald Trump administration, what we have now is a growing movement on the left and in mainstream Democratic politics to be more aggressive with regulation for businesses. And also, now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, its Dobbs decision, now abortion is very much a life or death issue at the state level. And as this election has showed, every abortion measure to support it passed, and every abortion measure to try to stop it failed. And you wonder why unmarried women are voting with the Democratic Party at a 37-point margin. And that's the thing, is that I suspect that this RNC autopsy they're going to do again, considering the fact that the people they're hiring to help it is just going to say the same bullshit. You know, the 2012 autopsy, written by a close personal friend, Tim Miller of the Bulwark. Tim, if you listen, I know we're not really close personal friends, but written by people in the Republican Party 10 years ago, you know, basically said they had to improve their communications and reach out to more minority voters and do a better stance. But then Donald Trump won in 2016, and then they decided that, hey, screw that, let's just do what Trump does. And now, this is where we're at today. An election in which, you know what, I don't even know why we keep using the term red to describe it, right? It went from red wave and red tsunami to red trickle. Can we just say it was a blue wave? Like, it was literally a blue wave in most parts of the country. Michigan, Illinois, Arizona. Like, the Republicans didn't take back places in very many places. They've lost in many places. And instead of just blaming themselves, they blame the reforms, or they blame the voters, or they blame, you know, the machines. Everyone except themselves and their strategy. And this is why the movement will not succeed. Because as long as they continue to ignore the most critical aspects of the campaigns and why they're failing, aka Donald Trump, and they try to blame everything else around the problem, all they're going to try to do is deal with these imaginary symptoms instead of the root cause of the disease. You know, Kari Lake is playing this whole the election was stolen again in Arizona nonsense, and guess what? It's over. It's been played out. It's done. Now you're the only person doing it, and you look like an asshole. Because you're being an asshole. Because you lost, and you won't admit it. And you know what? There's a lot of time between now and the next presidential election. Is it theoretically possible that the Republican Party will wise up and move in a different direction? In a, you know, not necessarily a Trump or DeSantis direction, but maybe more so towards Asa Hutchinson, the former governor, soon-to-be ex-governor of Arkansas, or Charlie Baker, or Larry Hogan. You know, Republicans from states that have crossover appeal and can win and have won. But part of the problem is that the Trump base of the party is, and I'm just going to say, they're selfish. They're selfish. They want what they want. They cheered when the people who voted to impeach Donald Trump lost their primaries, and then wonder why the crazy people they replaced them with lost those elections. How is it that a solid Republican district represented by Peter Meyer, who then gets primary and loses to a crazy person, John Gibbs, then loses to a Democrat by a large margin? It's because they've created an insular system in which they do not trust the outside media. They don't even trust people in the media of the same persuasion if they say something they don't agree with. And then all of a sudden, they're completely shocked and blown away. And you listen to the responses, and it's from dejected, I can't believe we lost, to the usual, they rigged the machine, so how are we ever going to win? And frankly, you know what? To the Republican Party, this is your fault. As someone who's been involved in this for years now, and has told people I'm involved with to not cater to these people, to not try to give them everything they want, that's exactly what they did. And now when they ask for the impossible and you can't give it to them, they blame you and will fall for the next grifter who says, I can make the impossible possible. Because they've been conditioned to believe things will happen that aren't true. And the longer you put off these conversations about how the party needs to change and move past Donald Trump to be successful again, you're going to get pushback, from the faithful and the operatives and the wishy-washy squishers. But you know what? I personally think it's time the Never Trump Republicans, if they're still in the Republican field, to come out and start punching. Say, hey man, we've been right the entire time. The entire time we were right about Donald Trump being bad for the party and for the country. And yet, despite our openness to people coming and joining the fray and realizing that it was wrong, many people choose to double down, refuse to admit it. And the last thing they'd want to do is ever say that someone that they disagreed with was correct. God help them if someone from the Bulwark knew more than them. Eric Erickson, or all the other GOP operatives who bought all the hype. You know, this is more just a rant than anything else, but I will say I'm impressed with the election results. They were run well. There really isn't any controversy, and many of these same Stop the Steal candidates deservedly lost and then properly conceded. So it's good news. It's good news all around. We'll see what happens in Georgia this month with the runoff election, though I do believe Raphael Warnock will pull it off, helping to cement further control of the Senate by the Democrats. I'm sure the Senate Democrats will continue to just have everything together and to try to, help Joe Biden accomplish his agenda. And I'm sure the Republican-controlled House will be a total shit show. And in that time, somehow the Republican Party has to act like it has it together, has a message, and can put up somebody to replace Joe Biden and or whoever replaces him at the highest level of power. And across the country. Frankly, far too many Republicans are financially benefiting and or scared of their lives when in regards to Trump. He's distorted the whole field. He's distorted the whole system to the point where now he's the best thing that's ever happened to the Democratic Party since Barack Obama. It's all quantifiable. It's all there. People like Illinois Review and Mark Vargas and all these people want to disagree with me and, say Trump's not the problem. Show me. Show me quantifiably Trump is not the problem. Because all the statistics we have from the places that matter, the swing areas, the votes, our exit surveys, all of us are telling the same thing. Trump is not popular. People don't like him, and they don't like what he stands for. And instead of just admitting that it's possible to have that opinion and still be in the same team, or at least disagree with it, they refuse. And so many people, like myself, split tickets. We split tickets and voted for some Republicans that we knew to be good people, and voted for Democrats who were clearly better choices than the garbage people the GOP put up in some other positions. This is going to keep happening. What's happened in Illinois is going to happen to the rest of the country. The Republican Party is getting smaller, it's getting weaker, it's getting older, and it's getting whiter. Despite all the other things they're saying, it's losing people that it needs to survive. It's not gaining enough new people to make a difference. And there's nothing they can do in between to fix that until Donald Trump is no longer the center of conversation. I don't know when it's going to happen. It should have stopped a long time ago. Should have been stopped after the insurrection. Should have been stopped after the elections were lost. And yet there are still people still pushing it. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But overall, the Democratic Party, I think, is in for a successful decade. And the GOP is not. Unless they really try to change and they really try to fix their problems with voters, all you will see over the next few years is 51-49, 52-48, 53-46, etc., etc., etc. Those points tick up. those close races start to lose, it translates down everywhere from the top of the ticket to the bottom. So your governors and your senators down to your county commissioners and supervisors and state reps, that all gets dragged down. Donald Trump is effectively bankrupting the future of the Republican Party to try to get leverage from it today. And let's not forget how much money he's still sitting on. Let's not forget how he still sucks up all the small dollar donations. Let's not forget how he's still the king of the Republican Party. And he wants to be the king of America. And so long as he is the predominant force, we will never move on. The Republican Party will be trapped in a cycle of loss and repeat until it gets it together and purges itself from Donald Trump. You know what? If they want to try to memory hole it, try to work around, try to take any policy that's successful and historically conservative and create some sort of agenda to run on that actually works, great. But as of right now, the only thing they're all running on is Dems bad, Trump good. And as long as that is the dynamic, they're going to lose. Plain and simple. Dynamic is Trump bad, everyone else good. That's what you got to do. Trump is the problem. Trump has always been the problem. Too many Republicans are caught up in the system and refuse to say it. But he's the problem. He's dragging everybody down. He's stealing from the future because the bench is no longer there. And frankly, if they try to kick him out, he's going to burn it all to the ground anyway. So, if the only option is to succumb to the beast or let the beast try to kill the party, there's only one thing left to do. Get rid of the beast.